The file was 40 pages long, and Oren read all of it before he said a single word. He was sitting in the small assignment room on Varith 9, the Sovereignty's diplomatic station that hung in the cold dark between Earth and its moon. The light in the room was blue-white, which was standard for Vethel workers, and the chair was slightly too wide for his frame, which was not. He had placed his documentation tools on the left side of the desk in the order he always placed them. Precision settled him. Routine settled him. He was a field scribe of the 3rd rank, and in 11 years of service he had documented the warfare histories of 16 species without a single report returned for revision. The assignment in front of him said, compile a full tactical and historical record of human warfare for the Sovereignty War Doctrine Archive. Estimated completion, 60 cycles. He had done the same for the Drenithi in 44. The Drenithi had been, by all accounts, the most aggressive species the Sovereignty had ever catalogued. He expected humanity to be similar. Loud data, clear patterns, a tidy report. The liaison officer arrived 12 minutes late. Her name was Dura. She was a human woman of middle age, with short gray hair and the kind of face that had decided a long time ago not to be impressed by things. She carried a cup of something hot and did not apologize for the time. She looked at Oren's desk at the tools arranged in a line and said, "That's very neat." "I prefer order," Oren said. "I can see that." She sat down across from him and looked at the file on his screen. "You've read the briefing?" "3 times. Any questions?" "Many," he said. "But I prefer to begin with the primary sources before forming questions. Questions formed too early tend to shape answers rather than find them." Dura looked at him for a moment. "That's a good way to think." "It is the only way to think," he said, without meaning it as an insult. She showed him to the archive room on sub-level 4, where the Sovereignty's treaty with humanity gave him access to several thousand years of military records, translated and indexed for non-human researchers. She entered the security code, and the doors opened onto a room full of soft light and stacked data terminals. She said she would be on the station if he needed her. She left. Oren sat down and began. He started with the oldest conflicts, as he always did, because older wars were simpler in structure and helped build a baseline. He moved through them efficiently. He flagged data points that were unusual. He took careful notes. He was 4 hours into his work when he found the first thing that stopped him. It was a ground engagement, roughly 400 years before the current date. A human military force of around 900 soldiers had been surrounded by an opposing force of nearly 3,000. Their supply route had been cut. They had no air support. They had no realistic line of retreat. By the tactical models Oren used for all species, the correct response in this situation was to request terms of surrender. Casualties would be minimized. The engagement would end. The mathematics were not complicated. The surrounded force had not requested terms. They had attacked. They had attacked the larger force directly, and after 11 hours of fighting, they had broken through and caused enough disorder in the opposing formation that the enemy had retreated. The 900 had survived. They had won. Oren read the record 3 times. He checked the source. The source was reliable. He ran the numbers through the tactical model again, adjusting for variables he might have missed. The model still said surrender. The historical record still said attack. He flagged it as an anomaly and moved on. By the end of his first day, he had flagged 3 more like it. Smaller instances. Different centuries. The same pattern underneath. A human force, facing odds that recommended one course of action, choosing the opposite. He marked all of them as outliers. Outliers were normal in any historical dataset. No species was perfectly consistent. He went back to his quarters, ate his meal, reviewed his notes, and prepared for the next day. At the end of the meal, he found himself thinking about the 900 soldiers. Not about the tactics. About the moment before the attack, when someone had given an order and 900 people had followed it. He tried to model what a Vethel soldier would have felt in the same position. The answer came quickly. The recognition that the situation was lost, and the calm that came from accepting what logic required. He could not model what the human soldiers had felt. The data did not capture that. He made a note to ask Dura in the morning. He asked her the next day, in the corridor outside the archive room, while she was drinking. From the same cup, or one exactly like it. Why did they attack, he said. The 900. The mathematics did not support it. Dura thought about it. Not for a long time. Maybe 4 seconds. Then she said, probably because someone told them they could. Oren wrote this down in his personal log, in the margin beside the anomaly flag. He was not sure what it meant. He was sure, in the quiet way that he trusted after 11 years of this work, that it meant something. He went into the archive room and began again. The file for day 2 was 600 pages long. He read all of it before he said a word. On the 19th day, Oren stopped flagging anomalies. Not because there were fewer of them, because there were too many, and at some point a thing that appears in every single dataset you review is no longer an anomaly. It is the data. He deleted the anomaly column from his spreadsheet and sat looking at the empty space, where it had been for a long moment. Then he made a new column. He labeled it pattern. He filled it with everything he had flagged. The pattern was this: in a statistically improbable number of human military engagements. Across every century he had reviewed, the losing side did not behave like the losing side. They did not calculate their odds and respond accordingly. They responded to something else. Something that did not appear to be data at all, and in many cases this response changed the outcome of the engagement entirely. Oren was precise in his thinking. He did not like imprecise words. But he wrote, in his personal log, the following sentence: human forces appear to take their instructions from somewhere other than the situation in front of them. He read it back. It was imprecise. He did not delete it. He began pulling physiological records to find a biological explanation. He was good at this. Biology explained a great deal of behavior that seemed strange from the outside. The Drenathy, for example, entered a neurological state during combat that lowered their ability to feel pain. This explained their notorious frontline aggression. There was always a mechanism. Oren trusted mechanisms. He found the human data on biochemistry during extreme stress and read it with growing attention. The chemicals were not unfamiliar. Most warm blood species produced versions of them. What was unusual was the effect. In nearly every other documented species, the chemical cascade produced by extreme physical danger triggered a strong drive toward self-preservation, retreat, surrender, or stillness. The body choosing to survive. In humans, the same cascade produced the opposite. He read the research twice. He looked up secondary sources. The secondary sources agreed. Human bodies, flooded with stress chemicals that would cause paralysis or shutdown in most known species, became faster, stronger, less sensitive to pain, more focused, more willing to act. Oren wrote in his documentation, human biology appears specifically adapted to situations that should kill them. He had written the word designed first. He changed it to adapted. He was not sure why. The original word felt wrong. He moved on. He found a naval engagement from 150 years prior. A human fleet of 9 ships against an opposing fleet of 31. The human commander, by every tactical model, should have harassed the flanks of the larger fleet and attempted a strategic withdrawal. Instead, he ordered a direct attack on the opposing flagship, the single most heavily defended vessel in the enemy formation. The flagship went down in 40 minutes. The opposing fleet lost cohesion without its command ship. The human force survived with. For ships lost. Oren spent 3 hours trying to construct a model in which attacking the flagship was the optimal tactical choice. He could not do it. The numbers did not support it. The attack had worked, and it had not worked because of mathematics. He wrote, this engagement was not correct. It simply succeeded. He stared at that sentence for a long time. It violated something in him that he could not name. Dura came to the archive room that afternoon to check on his progress, as she did every few days. She found him sitting still in front of 6 open screens, all showing different conflicts from different centuries, all with the pattern column filled in. You look like you've seen something upsetting, she said. I have seen something consistent, he said. It is upsetting because it should not be consistent. Each of these instances should be a rare exception. Together they form a rule. What rule? He thought about how to say it. That human forces do not always respond to the conditions of a battle. They respond to something internal. Something that does not update when the odds change. Dura considered this. We call that stubbornness, she said. Is it considered a virtue? Depends on who wins. Oren looked at his screens. In the data, he said slowly, it seems to coincide with winning at a rate that should not be statistically possible. Dura nodded. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, how's the report going? It is going, he said. I am not certain where it is going. She left him to it. He sat alone in the archive room for another 4 hours. He was no longer moving efficiently through the records. He was moving carefully. There was a difference. He had started efficient and was becoming careful the way a person becomes careful when they realize the ground beneath them is not quite what they assumed. He documented everything. He did not skip anything. He told himself this was because thoroughness was his professional standard. This was true. There was also another reason, which he did not write down yet, which was that he had begun to feel, without any supporting evidence, that he was supposed to see all of it. The shuttle from Vareth 9 to Earth took 6 hours, and Oren spent all of it reading interview frameworks that he then quietly set aside. He had conducted 47 interviews across his career. He knew how they worked. You arrived with structured questions. You followed the structure. The structure kept things clean. But the archive records had done something to his thinking, loosened it in ways he was still identifying, and he found himself uncertain which questions were the right ones. He had never been uncertain before an interview. He noted this in his personal log and did not examine it further. Dura met him at the landing point and drove him to the first appointment. She did not fill the silence with conversation, and he was grateful for that. Outside the window, the human cities moved past, dense and layered and very old in the way that places built by people who kept surviving tend to become old. The first interview was with a military historian. He was an older man with a careful voice, who had spent 40 years studying how human warfare doctrine had changed over time. Oren asked him to describe the most significant pattern in that change. The historian said it was not a pattern, it was a habit. Every time humanity lost badly, it studied the loss and rebuilt its doctrine around never losing that way again. Other aspects of doctrine would suffer. Resources would be pulled. Old methods that worked in other contexts would be abandoned. But the specific defeat would be studied until it was understood completely, and then it would become the foundation for what came next. You reinvent after failure, Oren said. Constantly, the historian said. We're very bad at staying the same after we lose. Most species become more conservative after large losses, Oren said. More protective, less willing to extend. The historian nodded. We do the opposite. Losing makes us want to understand. Understanding makes us want to try again. It's not always rational. He paused. It's usually effective. Oren wrote this down and said nothing. The second interview was with a retired general. She was a small woman who sat with very straight posture and answered questions with short sentences. Oren asked her what factor, in her experience, most reliably decided the outcome of a battle. She said, what the losing side has left to lose. He asked her to explain. She said, the most dangerous force in any engagement is one that believes it has nothing left. A force that still has things to protect will manage risk. A force with nothing left will not. Risk management is what creates predictable behavior. Remove it, and the other side has no model for what comes next. She looked at him steadily. That's a very uncomfortable position to fight against. Oren thought about the 900 surrounded soldiers from his very first day in the archive. He thought about the flagship that went down. He said, is this something that can be trained into a force, or does it arise from circumstance? Both, she said. The best commanders I knew could make their people feel it before the situation required it. That's the harder skill. Most wait for the situation to produce it. The third interview was the one that stayed with him. The veteran was a young man, not much past 30, who had received an award for charging an entrenched defensive position alone during a ground engagement in which his unit had been pinned down and taking casualties. He had disabled the position. The unit had been able to move. He had survived, which his expression suggested still surprised him occasionally. Oren asked him why he had done it. The veteran thought about the question with genuine attention, as if he had asked it of himself many times and found the answer slightly different each time. Then he said, I didn't. Think about it. I do not understand, Oren said. I mean, I made a choice not to think about it, the veteran said. Because I knew that if I thought about it, the thinking would tell me not to go. And people were dying. So I just went. Oren was quiet for a moment. You deliberately prevented your own reasoning from influencing your action. Yeah, the veteran said. I guess that's what I did. Is that common? The veteran almost smiled. More than people will admit. On the drive back, Oren did not speak for a long time. Dur did not push him. When they were close to the landing point, he said, the historian told me about Archive 7, a collection of prisoner of war recordings. He said the voice in it speaks about why humans fight. I know the archive, Dur said. I would like access. She was quiet for a moment. I'll see what I can do. She got him the access by the time he boarded the shuttle. He opened the recording on the way back up to Vareth 9. The voice was calm, almost quiet. A captured officer speaking. During an interrogation that had clearly not broken anything in him. Oren listened with his full attention, which was the only way he knew how to listen. He played it 3 times before they docked. One line followed him off the shuttle, down the corridor, and into his quarters, where it sat. In the room with him while he stared at the ceiling. You want to know why we don't stop? It is because stopping is a choice, and we are very bad at making choices that feel like dying. Oren found the change on a Tuesday, which was a human unit of time he had begun using. Because the station followed human calendar cycles, and it was easier than converting. He had been writing a section of the report about human naval doctrine when he stopped to review what he had written the previous session. The words on the screen were not quite his. Not wrong, not poorly reasoned, but sharper than he remembered writing them. More certain, as if someone had taken his draft and pulled it tighter. He read the passage 3 times and could not find a single error in it, which troubled him more than if it had been full of errors. He checked the edit log. No edits. No other users had touched the file. He reported it to the station's technical team. 2 technicians came, reviewed the system. For an hour, found nothing, and told him that his file was secure and unmodified. He thanked them. They left. He sat looking at the passage again. It happened a second time 4 days later. This time the change was in his summary notes for Part 6 of the report, a section he had not yet formally written. He had left rough thoughts there, half-formed, the kind of loose language he used as a placeholder. Now the language was not loose. It was finished, and it was correct. He knew it was correct because it matched what he had been slowly working toward concluding, but had not yet put into those words. He went very still in his chair. Then, on the screen, in the section he was currently drafting, a line appeared that he had not typed. He watched it appear. His hands were on the desk beside the keyboard. He watched the words form one by one, as if being typed by someone he could not see. They do not win because they are strong. They win because they decide to. He did not move for a long time. Then he opened Archive 7 and searched the full transcript for those words. He found them in a section at the end of the recording, a section he had not yet reached in his review. The words were exact. Every one of them. In the same order. He sat with this for a while. He was a precise thinker. He listed the possible explanations. In order of likelihood. Software error. Memory failure on his part. Some form of automated archive cross-referencing he was not aware of. He marked all of them as possible. He marked none of them as satisfying. He found Dura in the station's common area and told her everything in the order it had happened. She listened without interrupting, which he had come to understand was her version of taking something seriously. When he finished, she said, "Do you think the archive is sending you something, or do you think you already knew it and your mind put it there?" He had no answer. She said, "That's the most human thing you've done so far." He was still thinking about that when Admiral Hesso called. Hesso was a large vessel in the political caste, which meant he wore his seniority visibly, and spoke in the measured tone of someone who expected to be agreed with. He had reviewed Oren's preliminary submissions, and his expression on the screen was the kind of carefully neutral that meant displeasure being managed. He said the framing was a problem. He said the report, as it stood, presented humanity as an unpredictable force whose behavior could not be reliably modeled. He said the council needed the report to present humanity as a known quantity, a species with aggressive tendencies that were understandable, cataloged, and therefore manageable. He said Oren should revisit his framing with this purpose in mind. Oren said, the framing reflects the data. Hesso said, the data can be presented in more than one way. Oren said, I am aware of that. I am presenting it the way that is accurate. The silence that followed was not comfortable. Hesso said, I am asking you to adjust the framing, Oren. Not the numbers. The framing. Oren said, the framing is the conclusion. The conclusion follows from the numbers. If I change the framing without changing the numbers, the report will be internally inconsistent. That is not something I can submit. It was the first direct order he had ever refused in 11 years of service. He did not raise his voice. He did not feel the need to. Hesso ended the call without responding. That night, Oren opened Archive 7 and started from the beginning, moving through the full recording now without skipping sections. He was alone in the archive room. At some point, he spoke aloud, which was not something he normally did when working. He said, to the room, to the screen, to the voice in the recording, what are you? He had not expected an answer. He had never expected an answer. The recording moved forward on its own into the final unreviewed section, the part that contained the line he had not typed. The voice in Archive 7 spoke at a different pace here, slower, as if choosing each word from a larger pile. And it said, the same thing you are? Someone trying to understand. Oren closed the file. He sat in the dark for a long time. He did not try to explain it. For the first time, he found that he did not need to explain it. He just needed to keep going. There was a room on sub-level 2 of Verith 9 that Oren had walked past many times without going inside. It was the immersion simulation chamber used by sovereignty officers for tactical training. The door was not locked. It had simply never been relevant to him. He was a scribe, not a soldier. He documented what soldiers did. He stood in front of that door for 3 minutes before he opened it. He requested access to the historical simulation library and loaded the engagement from his first day in the archive, the battle he had flagged as an anomaly before he understood that. Anomaly was the wrong word. 900 soldiers surrounded by 3,000. The order to attack. The impossible result. He had read it so many times the numbers had become automatic. He wanted to know what the numbers felt like from inside them. He entered as a soldier, not as a commander. He did not want to see the decision from above. He wanted to see it from the ground, from where the boots were, from where the order arrived, and had to be either followed or not. The simulation was precise. The sovereignty's historical modeling was built on archived sensory data and environmental records, and the result was not comfortable in the way that a training model made for Vethel officers would have been comfortable. It was loud in a way. That was not about volume. The ground had a particular weight. The air tasted of something he did not have a name for. He lasted 11 minutes. He did not shut it down because of the noise or the weight or the taste. He shut it down because he reached the moment. He felt it before he saw it. A shift in the atmosphere of the simulation, a point at which the other soldiers around him changed in a way that was not visible but was absolutely present, the way a herd changes before it moves. Then the order came. Simple words. Forward. And every calculation he had ever made, every model he trusted, every mechanism he used to understand behavior, arrived at the same answer at the same time. Do not go forward. He stood in the simulation while the soldiers around him moved past him, and he felt the full weight of what they were doing, which was choosing something that every rational signal available to them said not to choose. He could not make himself go with them. He shut it down. He sat on the floor outside the simulation room for 2 hours. He was not sure what he was waiting for. Dura found him. She did not appear surprised to find him on the floor. She sat down next to him against the wall and said nothing. He appreciated this. After a while he said, I could not do it. Nobody expects you to, she said. That is not the point. I could not understand it well enough to do it. And if I cannot understand it well enough to do it, I cannot write about it correctly. Dura was quiet for a moment. Then she said, it's not about not being afraid. He waited. That's what people get wrong, she said. They think the ones who go forward are not afraid. They're afraid. They just move anyway. She looked at the wall across from them. The fear doesn't go away. You just stop letting it make your decisions. That sounds like a very uncomfortable way to live, Oren said. Yeah, she said. It is. He sat with this. Then he said, Are the ones who move always afraid? She thought about it seriously. The good ones are, she said. He got up off the floor. He thanked her, which was not something he said easily. She waved it off. He went back to his documentation chamber, sat down at his desk, and began to write. He wrote for 16 hours. He did not stop to eat. He stopped twice to drink water. He wrote the section he had been building toward since the first day in the archive, the conclusion that HFY had told him to reframe and that he was not going to reframe. He wrote it plainly, in the simplest language he could find, because the simplest language was the hardest to argue with. He wrote that humanity did not win through superior numbers, or superior technology, or superior doctrine. He wrote that humanity won because at a species level, in some place that was deeper than strategy and older than training, it had agreed that the only outcome it could not accept was the one where it stopped trying. He wrote that this agreement was not rational. He wrote that it worked anyway. He wrote that the sovereignty needed to account for this in any model it built of human behavior, because any model that did not include it would be wrong at the exact moment it was most needed. He titled the final section of his report, What the Sovereignty Does Not Want to Know About Humanity, and Why It Needs to Know It Anyway. He looked at the title for a moment. He left it. He did not answer when HFY called. He watched the notification appear and then disappear, and then turned back to his screen. The report was nearly done. He would finish it. Whatever came after the finishing was a separate matter. He reached the last line of the conclusion just before the station's lights shifted to the dim cycle that marked the end of the day. He read the full report from the beginning, found for places where the language could be sharper, sharpened them, and saved it. He sat back in his chair. For the first time in 37 days, he felt finished. The report was 340,000 words long, and Oren submitted it on a Wednesday morning without ceremony, without a covering note, without the standard summary brief that field scribes were expected to attach for senior readers who did not want to read 340,000 words. He attached everything: the full interview transcripts, the primary source archive records, the archive's 7 recordings in their entirety, the unexplained discrepancies in his documentation file, logged in precise detail with timestamps, and the technician's report, confirming no external cause. His personal log, appended at the end, labeled clearly as personal observation rather than evidence, included because he believed that who did the watching was part of what was watched. Then he sat back and waited. The response from HFY came in under 3 hours, which was fast for the sovereignties administrative systems, and told Oren something about how closely the submission had been monitored. The message did not contain words like unacceptable or unauthorized. It contained careful language about scheduling a review session with the High Council, and the careful language was doing a great deal of work to cover what it actually meant, which was, you have created a problem. The High Council session was held remotely, which meant Oren sat in the archive room on Vareth 9 and spoke to a screen showing 7 senior sovereignty members arranged in the curved formal seating of the council chamber back home. HFY sat to the left. His expression was the expression of a Vethel who had prepared for a long and uncomfortable meeting. The first council member to speak was responsible for external threat classification. She said the report's conclusions, if accepted, would require reclassification of humanity from Tier 3 aggression to Tier 1 existential threat. She said this was not a small procedural change. She said it had treaty implications, diplomatic implications, and resource implications that the council was not currently positioned to address. The second council member to speak was HFY. He said the report's framing was the product of a field scribe who had spent too long in proximity to his subject. He said the personal log should be removed. He said the anomaly documentation should be reviewed by a second researcher. He said the conclusion was not objective. The third council member to speak was an older woman named Sethan, who was responsible for the War Doctrine Archive itself. She said the report was the most significant document submitted to her archive in 200 years. She said this without apparent emotion. She said that the field scribe's personal log was precisely the kind of material the archive had been designed to preserve, because the archive's purpose was not just to collect data, but to record what the data did to the person who collected it. Hesso said, "That is not what the archive is for." Sedhan said, "It is what the archive was for before your time, Hesso, and it will be what it is for after." Oren was asked to speak. He had prepared nothing, because he had found that prepared words in these situations had a tendency to become the words he was expected to say rather than the words that were true. He spoke plainly. He said, "I went to document a species that goes to war. What I found was a species that goes to war because it has decided to survive. There is a difference. A species that goes to war for territory, for resources, for political advantage, that behavior can be modeled. It has limits. It has stopping points. A species that fights because surviving is the one thing it has collectively agreed not to stop doing is not the same kind of problem. Any model, the sovereignty builds of human behavior that does not account for this will be accurate in calm conditions and wrong at the exact moment it needs to be right. I recommend we account for it honestly." The vote was close. 4-3. The report was not suppressed. It was classified at the highest level available for external species documentation, meaning fewer than 80 people in the sovereignty would ever read it in full. But by the terms of the original research treaty, a summary copy was automatically transmitted to Earth's Interstellar Affairs Bureau. At the moment of official classification, Oren had not known about the treaty clause. He sat with this fact for a while. Dura's message arrived 6 hours later. She was on Earth. She had received the Bureau notification and read the summary. The message was 3 letters. It said, "Good." He read it twice. He set it aside. He opened a new file on his documentation terminal. The header was blank. He sat in front of it in the blue-white light of his archive room, with his tools arranged in their usual line on the left side of his desk, with the station quiet around him, with Earth hanging in the viewport at the edge of his peripheral vision, blue and old and patient. He thought about Archive 7 and the voice in it. He thought about the simulation and the 11 minutes. He thought about 900 soldiers who attacked when the numbers said surrender. He thought about Dura saying, "They just move anyway." He typed a title, not an assigned title, his own. He had never initiated a project before, without an assignment to justify it. The title said, "The question of whether other species could learn what humans know." He did not know the answer. He was not certain there was one. He filed the project with the archive under his own name, without attaching it to any existing program or commission. Then he began. The herd had taught him where the edges were. He had walked to the edge and found the horizon. He understood, in a quiet and permanent way, that he was not going back.